Rosalind stood at the parlor window of Greymere, with both hands pressed flat against the glass, watching the black motorcar make its way up the gravel drive, and she thought, "I am ready. I have rehearsed this." She had not slept the night before. She had lain in the narrow east room, not the bedroom she and Hugh had briefly, carefully shared in those first months, and she had pressed one hand against her stomach and breathed. Just breathed, because breathing was the only thing that required no decision. 9 days earlier, Dr. Whitfield had told her, in his measured, unsentimental way, that she was carrying a child. She had thanked him. She had paid with money from the tin she kept inside her writing box, the money her father had pressed into her hand 3 weeks before he died, saying, "Keep something that is only yours, Rosalind. Promise me." She had walked the 2 miles home along Millbrook Road in the cold March air and made herself a promise of her own. She would not tell Hugh. Not because she was afraid of him. Hugh Blackwell was not a man who frightened anyone. He was careful, withdrawn, the kind of man who had grown so accustomed to his mother's management that he had mistaken it for his own judgment. She would not tell him because she understood exactly what would happen if she did. He would stay, and 5 years from now, she would watch him look at her across the dinner table and wonder whether it was her he had chosen, or the circumstance she had handed him. That uncertainty, living inside a marriage like a splinter too deep to reach, would be worse than any document. The motorcar stopped. Hugh stepped out. He looked the same. Longer coat than she remembered, hat brim lower against the March wind. He was carrying a leather case. She recognized the shape of it. She opened the door before he could knock. "Rosalind," he said. "Hugh." She stepped back from the threshold. He came into the parlor and set the case on the side table. The document inside was heavy paper, official, the kind of thing that takes a week to prepare. "My mother retained a solicitor," he said. "There's a procedural irregularity in the original marriage registration. An argument for a quiet dissolution. No formal fault attributed to either party." Rosalind looked at the document without touching it. "Your mother retained him," she said. "Yes." "And what have you decided, Hugh?" The silence that followed was longer than he intended. She could see him working through the gap between what he had planned to say and what the honest answer actually was. "I believe," he started carefully, "that you deserve a life not defined by a legal arrangement neither of us chose." "Stop." Her voice was quiet. It did not shake. "Please stop describing what I deserve as though you have the authority to determine it." She looked at him steadily. "You came here with a document prepared by your mother's solicitor, and you are framing it as a kindness. I want you to stand in this parlor and hear yourself say that." Something moved through his face. Not quite shame. She had not yet learned to distinguish shame from discomfort in him, though she was beginning to suspect they were, in Blackwell men, nearly identical. "Sit down," she said. "Meg will bring coffee. We are going to have this conversation like two adults who once meant something to each other, and we are going to do it properly." He sat. Meg appeared from the kitchen, with the expression of a woman who was absolutely not eavesdropping, and had heard every word. She set the tray down without comment, gave Hugh the look she reserved for people who had disappointed her without sufficient cause, and withdrew with dignity. "You left in September," Rosalind said at last. "You wrote me 4 letters between September and March. 3 were about estate business. The 4th asked whether the Prentice family had renewed their tenancy." She held his gaze. "You did not ask how I was. You did not ask if I was lonely or frightened. You asked about the tenants, and then your mother's solicitor sent a preliminary notice about the filing irregularity. Not you. Your mother's solicitor." "I know," he said low. "So do not tell me you haven't come here to hurt me. You may not have intended it. But choosing to let your mother send that notice instead of coming yourself, that was a choice. And it hurt. And you knew it would." He pressed one hand over his face briefly and dropped it. "You're right," he said. "I should have come months ago. I should have written real letters. I didn't because I didn't know what to say, and I was a coward about not knowing." She had not expected that word, not from him. "Do you want this marriage to be over?" she asked. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Outside, the motorcar's engine ticked as it cooled. "I don't know," he said finally. Rough, like something dragged up from somewhere he hadn't intended to reach. She had built the entire morning around withstanding yes, around the clean, decisive wound of it. "I don't know" was so much harder. She stood and crossed to the window, not to see anything, but to put 3 feet of space between herself and the document and the man, and the feeling pressing up under her ribs. She stood with her back to him, and her hands clasped in front of her, and looked out at the dead March garden, at the stone wall her father had built along the property's eastern edge. She pressed one hand briefly against her side, then she dropped it. "I cannot make that decision for you," she said. "That has never been something I would do. You know that about me." She turned back to face him. "What I can tell you is that I will not sign a document because your mother finds it convenient. If you want to end this marriage, Hugh, you are going to have to look me in the eye and tell me. Not your mother, not a solicitor, not a piece of heavy paper. You will have to tell me you want it to be over. Can you do that?" He looked at her across the room. The March light came through the windows flat and honest, the kind that flatters nothing. He opened his mouth. He closed it. "No," he said. He left at midday with the case, the document still unsigned. Rosalind stood in the doorway and watched until the motorcar disappeared down the road. Then she went inside and sat at the kitchen table and put both hands flat on the wood and closed her eyes. For the first time since Thursday, she let herself feel exactly how frightened she was. Not of him, not of the document, but of the single moment she already knew was coming. The moment she would no longer be able to keep the secret. The moment she would have to stand in front of Hugh Blackwell and find out once and for all whether he was a man who would choose her, or only a man who would feel obligated. The letter from Lady Millicent Blackwell arrived 2 mornings later. 1.5 pages. It opened with expressions of sincere concern for Rosalind's health and well-being. It arrived, in its second paragraph, at its actual purpose. Lady Millicent had become aware that Rosalind had recently consulted Dr. Whitfield in Millbrook and wished to inquire, in the spirit of family concern, whether there was any matter pertaining to her health the family ought to know of. Rosalind read that paragraph twice. Then she folded the letter along its original creases and held it in both hands. "Meg," she said. How does Lady Blackwell know I visited Dr. Whitfield?" Meg turned from the stove with the careful expression of someone choosing between versions of the truth. "Small town. Millbrook's maybe 600 people. A woman from Greymere rides in alone, visits the doctor, pays cash, rides home alone. That gets remarked on." A pause. "Especially if someone's already asking questions about her." Rosalind looked at the letter. Lady Millicent was not asking a genuine question. She was asking the question of a woman who believed she already knew the answer, and wanted to see whether Rosalind would confirm it. She composed a reply. "I thank you for your kind concern. I am in good health and have no news to share at this time." Accurate. A closed door, not a lie but not a gift either. She sealed it, gave it to Meg to post, then sat at her writing desk with her hands in her lap and looked at the phrase she had used. No news to share at this time. The clock was not theoretical. It was biological, and it did not care about her plans. She rode into Millbrook the next morning and found Hugh in the inn's sitting room with a cup of tea and a newspaper he clearly wasn't reading. "Your mother wrote to me," she said, sitting down across from him without being invited. She watched the recognition move through his face, not surprise, but the sharper thing below it. When she finished telling him, he was quiet for 2 full breaths. "I didn't tell her about the doctor." "I know you didn't. You didn't know about it yourself. Which means she had someone watching me, Hugh. Someone who noticed my visit and reported it back." She looked at him steadily. "That is the woman whose judgment you have been following." Something moved through his face below the surface. Something foundational being tested. "What did you tell her?" he asked. "That I was in good health and had no news to share." She held his gaze. "She won't leave it there. Which is why I'm here, and why I'm going to ask you something directly. Did you know your mother was having me watched?" "No." A pause. "I knew she was invested in the outcome. I didn't ask what that investment looked like in practice." Choosing not to ask a question, because you don't want to know, the answer is still a choice. "I understand that," he said quietly. "Good. Then understand this. Whatever your mother is planning, this situation has a timeline that is not entirely under my control anymore. You need to decide what you actually want, Hugh, before your mother decides it for you." The sitting room was quiet around them. "There's something you're not telling me," Hugh said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said finally, "there is." "Are you going to tell me?" "Not today." She stood. "There are things I need to understand first about where you actually stand." She was halfway home when she heard the horse behind her. She kept her pace. Hugh came alongside her on the bay gelding, matching her without pulling ahead. "I wrote to my mother," he said, "the day after I came to Greymere, Before I knew about her letter to you. I told her I was handling the matter myself. I dismissed the solicitor." She held that. She turned it over carefully, making herself distinguish between what it meant and what she wanted it to mean. "Why?" she asked. "A few strides. Then, because sitting in that parlor with you, I understood I'd been letting other people define what was happening between us. I'd been calling it judgment. Responsibility." He paused. "It was cowardice." The word came out plain and unadorned. She noted that he did not flinch from it. They rode the rest of the way to Greymere in silence. Not the silence of that first morning, which had been heavy with everything unspoken, but a different kind. The kind that doesn't need to be filled, because the people inside it have already said the hardest thing, and are still, improbably, moving in the same direction. She sent a note to the Millbrook Inn that evening. 4 sentences. She asked Hugh to come to Greymere in the morning. She said she had something to tell him. She said she preferred to say it at the house. She signed it with her full name for the first time in months, Rosalind Blackwell. He arrived at 8:30, on horseback, without the leather case. She opened the door before he knocked. She was not bracing herself this time. She was simply opening the door. "Hugh," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything." "All right." She took one breath. "I am pregnant." The silence was the longest she had ever sat inside. Not a blank silence. The silence of a man confronting the difference between suspecting something and actually knowing it. "How far along?" His voice was careful and low. "Dr. Whitfield confirmed it 9 days ago. Approximately 8 weeks. The timing is consistent with January." She kept her voice even. "Before you left." He absorbed the arithmetic, the dates, the months. The fact that she had known every minute he stood in her parlor, talking about dissolution proceedings and quarterly allowances. "You knew," he said slowly. "When I came with the papers, you knew the entire time." "Yes." He exhaled. The most unguarded sound she had ever heard from him. A single breath carrying something enormous. The sound of a man's understanding of a situation completely restructuring itself. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew what you would do," she said. "I knew you would fold that case and put the document away and tell me we'd work it out, and you would mean it in that moment. But in a year or 5, you would look at me and see the woman who produced the child at the exact moment you were trying to leave. And you would wonder, always quietly, whether you stayed because you chose to, or because I made it impossible to do anything else." She held his gaze. "I will not be the woman who trapped you, not even with the truth." Something in his face broke open, not dramatically, but the way old wood breaks along a grain that was always the weakest point, finally given sufficient pressure. He stood. He crossed to the window. She let him. "You could have used it," he said, his back to her. "Any woman in this county would have used it. My mother expected you to use it. It's why she was so desperate to find out about the doctor before you could tell me yourself." He turned. "Why didn't you?" "Because I have watched women spend their whole lives being kept," she said. "Kept in arrangements that were never their choice, by obligation or information, or the simple fact that they had no alternative. I would rather raise this child alone, with this house and my father's books and Meg's company, than raise them inside a marriage where you are always wondering what else your life might have been." He crossed back from the window and stood close enough that she had to look up slightly to hold his eyes. "I came here 6 days ago with that document," he said. "I'd convinced myself it was the right thing, the adult thing. And you sat across from me and you did not cry, and you did not beg, and you did not use what you knew to stop me." He looked at her steadily. "A woman does not do that if she was ever trying to trap someone. Your mother believes otherwise." "My mother is wrong. Flat, absolute, no qualification around it. My mother has spent 30 years believing that every woman who marries into money has a scheme, because that is the only framework she has for understanding why a woman would want anything at all, and I have been letting her frame this situation. I have been letting her frame you. That is inexcusable, Rosalind. I am not going to dress it up as anything else." She looked at him carefully. "This child is real. The fact that I'm telling you does not obligate you. I'm telling you because you had a right to know, and because your mother was closing in on the truth, and I would not allow her to be the one to tell you." She paused. "But I am not telling you so that you will stay. I am telling you so that you can make a real choice, with all of the information, for the first time in this entire situation. And if I choose to stay, then you choose to stay knowing I will never let you manage me," she said. "Knowing I will call things what they are, including when you are wrong. Knowing I am not a quiet wife who asks nothing and is grateful for whatever attention comes her way. She held his gaze. Knowing that I am, as your mother has probably told you on more than one occasion, considerably more trouble than Philippa Hartson would ever be. Something moved through his face, quick, involuntary, gone before she could fully read it. She has said something very much like that, he said, several times. A pause. I've started to think that trouble, as my mother defines it, might be precisely what I should have been looking for. She would not say it yet. She was not ready, and readiness mattered to her. Saying things before you were fully prepared to mean them was its own kind of dishonesty. But she felt it. Something that had been pressed down so long she had nearly forgotten it was still there. Simply let go of its own management and become what it was. All right, she said. He put on his hat. He took one step down from the door. And then the sound of a motor car came up the drive. Not his, heavier, deliberate. The kind of vehicle that announced its own importance. Hugh heard it. The recognition moved through his face, sharp and immediate. She didn't wait for the letter, he said. Lady Millicent Blackwell descended from the motor car, with the assistance of her driver, settling her coat, collecting her walking stick. She was a tall woman, older than Rosalind always expected, with the kind of face that had become formidable where it had once been handsome. She looked at Hugh. She looked at Rosalind. She read the situation with the speed of a woman who had been reading situations for 40 years and had never once drawn the wrong conclusion. I know about the child, she said. The words fell into the morning air, like stones into still water. Rosalind did not move. She held Lady Millicent's gaze steadily, without giving her the satisfaction of watching the impact arrive. Then you know more than I knew 2 weeks ago, she said calmly. And you learned it by having someone watch my movements without my knowledge or consent. She tilted her head slightly. I wonder whether Dr. Whitfield's medical board would find that detail as interesting as I do. A silence. Something in Lady Millicent's expression recalculated. You're clever, she said, in the tone of a chess player acknowledging a good move. I'm my father's daughter, Rosalind said. He was a physician, but he was also a man who read the law for pleasure. He believed in knowing your rights, Lady Blackwell, and in knowing when they have been violated. Lady Millicent looked at Hugh. You should have told me. I'm telling you now, Hugh said. We are keeping the marriage. Rosalind is carrying my child. The dissolution proceedings are finished. Whatever arrangement you made with the Hartson family, I trust you will unmake it with the same efficiency. Lady Millicent studied her son for a long, assessing moment. Then she looked at Rosalind. And in the single most unexpected thing she had done in Rosalind's experience of her, she inclined her head, slightly, in the direction of something that was not quite respect, but was its immediate neighbor. She descended the step. She turned toward the motor car. The child will carry the Blackwell name, she said. To the heir or to her driver, or to no one in particular. That is all that concerns me. She got in. The motor car went back down the drive without looking back. Hugh let out a long breath. That's not over. No, Rosalind agreed. But she just told us something. She said the child will carry the Blackwell name. She did not say the marriage was a mistake. She watched the dust settle on the drive. Lady Blackwell concedes nothing she doesn't have to concede. If she drove away without a legal threat or a new offer, it is because she has recalculated and found this outcome acceptable. Not preferred, acceptable. He looked at her for a moment. You read her very quickly. I read people quickly. It is one of the things about me that she finds troublesome. Rosalind looked back at the empty road. It is also, eventually, one of the things that will make her respect me. Not today, but eventually. 2 days later, Hugh found the letter. He had gone back to the Millbrook Inn to collect his belongings, and found, tucked beneath the unsigned dissolution document in the leather case, a folded sheet he had not put there. His mother's handwriting. His name at the bottom, or close enough to his name that a man not looking carefully would not have caught the difference. The document was a letter to Philippa Hartson's father, written in Hugh's name, confirming his intention to dissolve his marriage and his sincere anticipation of the forthcoming union with Miss Hartson. It referenced specific financial arrangements. It was dated 6 weeks ago, while Hugh had still been in the city, believing he was making his own decision about what to do. He had never been making his own decision. He rode back to Greymere at a pace that was everything a controlled man allows himself, instead of a gallop. Rosalind read the letter twice. She felt fury, Clean and hot, entirely on his behalf, different in character from anything she had felt on her own. How long has she been doing this? She said. He absorbed the question in a way that told her it landed somewhere further down than the immediate situation. Since my father died. I was 24. She stepped in. I let her, because I was grieving and she was useful, and I told myself that deferring to her was wisdom. He looked at the letter on the table. It wasn't wisdom. No, she said, not unkindly, just precisely. I'm going to the city. I'll retain a solicitor of my own choosing, not my mother's, not the family's, and understand what legal exposure exists. He paused. And then I'll have a conversation with my mother that will not be comfortable for either of us. Write to me, actual letters. Something moved through his face, quick, warm. I will. He was gone 11 days, he wrote twice. The first letter told her about Foss. A solicitor recommended by a judge Hugh trusted, entirely unconnected to Lady Millicent's network, and his assessment that the forged document provided sufficient grounds for legal action if Hugh chose to pursue it. It described the formal communication to the Hartson family, informing them the commitment had not been authorized and would not be honored. At the bottom of the third page, in handwriting looser and less deliberate than the careful legal summary above. The handwriting of a man writing from somewhere below his usual composure, he had added. I read the forged letter a third time this afternoon and understood for the first time what my mother actually thinks of me. Not what she says. What she thinks. She thinks I am a piece on a board that can be moved without consultation. I am past the first anger of it, and into something quieter that I don't have words for yet. I want you to know that I am all right. Not performing all right. Actually all right, the way that comes from making a decision that is entirely my own. H. Rosalind read that postscript 4 times. Then she folded the letter and put it inside her writing box, beside the tin of money her father had left her. The second letter came 6 days later, shorter. Lady Millicent had denied authorship of the forged letter until Foss produced a handwriting comparison against documented samples of her correspondence. Then she had stopped denying it and shifted, without pause, to explaining why it had been necessary. Hugh had underlined the word in the letter. She used it as though that settled the matter, he wrote, as though the necessity of an outcome she had determined justified the method. She looked genuinely confused that I disagreed. I told her that my marriage was my own, and my child was my own, and my name was my own, and none of those things were available to be managed by her, now or at any future point. She said I was making a catastrophic error in judgment. I told her that if it was an error, it was mine to make. I am coming home Thursday. I recognize that Greymere is not yet home in any formal or agreed upon sense. I am using the word anyway because it is the most accurate one I have. H. Meg came in from the side yard and looked at Rosalind's face and put the kettle on without being asked. Thursday, Rosalind said. Day after tomorrow, Meg said. I know when Thursday is, Meg. Just making sure, Meg said, and said nothing else. He arrived on a gray Thursday morning with a single traveling bag instead of the leather case, carrying himself the way a man carries something that is simply true. Not celebrating it, not recovering from it, just holding it. She opened the door. He stood on the step. Foss believes the forged letter creates significant legal exposure for your mother, she said, because pleasantries felt beside the point. His opinion is that she won't push further, Hugh said. She has too much to lose if it reaches a formal proceeding. The Hartson family severed contact with her entirely. Mr. Hartson was as disturbed by what she'd done in his name as anyone. It shouldn't surprise you. It didn't. He looked at her directly. Rosalind, I would like to come in, not as a visitor. I understand that is a different thing from what has come before, and I'm not asking you to agree to all of it today. But I would like to stop staying at the Millbrook Inn and conducting this marriage through letters. He stopped, steadied himself. I would like to try to be the person who should have been here in September. She looked at the traveling bag, at the absence of any leather case, at the hat in his hand and the way he was holding it, not like a prop, more like something he didn't know what to do with. You can come in, she said. We'll work the rest out as we go. That's fair, he said. It isn't entirely fair, she said, but it's what I have. He came in. The child arrived on a cold morning in November, quietly, efficiently, while Hugh paced the hallway with the concentrated anxiety of a man who managed most things, and had no capacity to manage this one. Meg came out after 2.5 hours and said, "A girl, both fine," and went back in before Hugh could ask any of the questions visible on his face. He came in when Meg let him. He sat beside the bed. He looked at the child, small, red-faced, already possessed of an expression of absolute certainty about her own presence in the world, and then at Rosalind, who was tired in the profound, specific way of someone who has just done something extraordinary and is not quite ready to believe it is finished. "She has your eyes," he said. "She's 4 hours old. She hasn't decided what her eyes are yet." "She has your expression," he said, "the one that says she's already made up her mind about something and isn't going to be argued out of it." The child made a small sound between them, not a cry, just a sound, the sound of someone who is present and intends to continue being present and would like that fact noted. Rosalind looked at Hugh, at his face, opened completely the way she had seen only once before. That first morning he had said "I don't know" in a voice that had followed her home down Millbrook Road and hadn't let go since. She thought about her father and the tin of money and the promise she had made herself on that cold March walk. She thought about how long she had been so determined not to be kept that she had nearly missed the difference between being kept and being chosen. "Hugh," she said. "Yes." "I love you," she said. "I have loved you for longer than I knew what to do with it. Before the dissolution papers. Possibly before September." She held his gaze. "I didn't say it because I needed to know that you were choosing me rather than being obligated to me. I needed to be certain I could say it and mean it entirely." He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were doing the unguarded thing, the full, unprotected thing, that she had stopped pretending she didn't value. "I chose you," he said, "on the morning I came to Greymere and could not say yes when you asked me whether I wanted the marriage to be over. I couldn't say it because it wasn't true. It has never been true." He covered her hand with his, the same simple gesture as always, the one that required no performance. "I'm sorry it took me so long to say the rest of it out loud." "All right," she said. Not the careful, provisional all right of March, the full and final all right of a woman who has decided, with complete information and clear eyes and her own full agency, that this is what she wants. Years later, when people in Millbrook spoke of the Blackwells of Greymere, they did not speak of the dissolution papers, or the forged letter, or the days Lady Millicent had arrived in her large motor car, certain she could move the situation as she moved most situations, by force of will and decades of practiced authority. They spoke of Rosalind's reading room in the church hall, stocked with her father's library and 3 shelves of law books she had ordered herself, because she believed that a woman who understood her rights was a woman who could not be so easily managed out of them. They spoke of Lady Millicent Blackwell, who visited every Christmas until travel became difficult, and who had, on 3 documented occasions, changed a position she had held for 20 years, because her daughter-in-law had handed her a fact she hadn't accounted for. Lady Millicent never said she had been wrong about the spring of 1907. She never needed to. The evidence of her error was in every room of the house, and she was too honest, at bottom, to pretend it wasn't. On her last Christmas visit she sat by the window with her tea and watched Rosalind across the room, reading to the girl, the two of them in the middle of a perfectly amiable argument about what a character in the story should have done differently, and she said to Hugh, very quietly, without preamble, "Your father would have loved her." "I know," Hugh said. "He would have said I was overreaching. He would have been diplomatic about it." "He would have been right about it," Lady Millicent said, and she drank her tea and said nothing else. The fire burned. The girl argued about the story. Rosalind laughed, the real laugh, the unguarded one, the one she had stopped managing sometime around the previous January, and the house held the particular warmth of a life that had been chosen rather than settled for. That was how it had always been meant to be, not arranged, not managed, not produced by a solicitor's careful paperwork or a mother's long-range maneuvering. Chosen, with full information, by people who had decided, at some cost, that honesty was the only foundation worth building on. And that, as Rosalind Blackwell had understood since the day she walked 2 miles home along Millbrook Road in the cold March air, with a secret and a promise, and both hands steady at her sides, was the only kind of life worth the trouble of living.